My daughter-in-law shoved me against the wall of the Cook County Courthouse in Chicago and screamed that I was a disgusting old hag, a disgrace to the family. She said this in front of attorneys, paralegals, court reporters, and security guards, people rushing by with files under their arms, their high heels clicking on the marble floor, hurrying to their own hearings. Everyone stopped and stared. Veronica Ashford, my daughter-in-law, raised her voice as if she were in her own home, as if I were merely an obstacle in her path. She pointed a finger at me, her nails perfectly manicured in a deep crimson, and repeated the same thing she had been telling me in private for years, but this time she did it in public. This time she wanted to humiliate me where it would hurt the most. My son, Michael, stood a few feet away, motionless, his hands in the pockets of his expensive suit, staring at the floor. He didn't even look up when she pushed me. He didn't even say her name to stop her. I said nothing. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just felt the coldness of the wall against my back, the weight of strangers' stares, the thick silence that fell after she finished yelling. I took a deep breath and lowered my head. I let them think what they wanted. I let them believe I was that weak woman, that voiceless old lady, that mother who let herself be trampled on because she had nowhere else to go. But inside, something shifted. Something broke, and it wasn't my heart. It was the last thread of hope I had, that this family still needed me, that I still mattered, that it was still worth staying silent. Veronica knew nothing. Michael didn't either. Neither of them knew who I really was. And in that moment, as she continued to speak with contempt and people began to move again, pretending they hadn't seen anything, I thought, just one thing. Just one thing. 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, they will know. I am 71 years old. My name is Elizabeth Morgan, and for 30 years I was a judge in this very courthouse. But they never knew that. I never told them. I preferred to be just a mom, just a grandmother, just the woman who cooked roast chicken and potatoes on Sundays and secretly slipped Michael money when he was in trouble, the invisible woman who didn't deserve a seat at the table when important guests were over. I hid my identity as if it were a shameful secret. I hid my accomplishments, my degrees, my victorious cases, everything, because I thought that if I were less demanding, if I were smaller, quieter, simpler, they would love me more. They would need me more. They would include me more. How wrong I was. Veronica finished screaming and turned away. She strode toward the courthouse entrance, her heels clicking, a designer handbag swinging from her shoulder with the arrogant confidence of someone who believes they've already won. Michael followed her, not looking at me, not apologizing, nothing. I stood there for a few more seconds. I took a deep breath. I smoothed down my beige sweater, the one Veronica always said made me look old. I ran a hand through my gray hair, the hair she suggested I dye because it made a bad impression, and then I walked toward the courthouse entrance, but I didn't go through the main doors. I didn't follow them. I didn't hide in a corner as they expected. I turned down a side corridor, the one only those of us who work here use. The one that leads directly to the private chambers, to the conference rooms, to the robing room where we keep our black judicial robes. I walked down that hallway in silence. I nodded to Patricia, the court clerk who has worked here for 20 years. She smiled at me. She asked if I was ready for today's case. I said yes, more than ready. I entered the robing room, took off the beige sweater, and slipped off the flat shoes Veronica said looked like a poor woman's shoes. I put on the black robe, the one that hung in a locker with my name embroidered inside. Elizabeth Morgan, Judge, Courtroom 3. I looked at myself in the mirror. 71 years old. Gray hair, wrinkles around my eyes, hands that trembled slightly, not from fear but from anticipation. I put on the glasses I only use for reading long documents. I adjusted the robe and walked out. I walked down the long corridor leading to Courtroom 3, the one where portraits of all the judges who have served here since 1950 hang. My portrait is there, third from the left, but they've never seen it. They never asked. They never cared. I reached the courtroom doors and pushed them open slowly. A bailiff held one open for me. Inside, people were already seated. Lawyers, witnesses, family members. And in the front row, on the right, sat Veronica Ashford, her back straight, looking over papers, speaking quietly with her assistant, confident, ready to win her case. Michael sat 2 rows behind her, just watching, waiting, still suspecting nothing. I entered through the side door, the one that leads directly to the judge's bench. I walked up the 3 wooden steps. I sat down in the high-backed chair, the one with my name engraved on a small plaque on the back. I placed my hands on the desk, took a deep breath, and waited. The murmuring in the courtroom continued for a few more seconds until someone looked up, until someone realized, until silence began to spread like a wave. Veronica still hadn't seen me. She was still looking at her papers, talking, laughing quietly with her assistant, so focused on her own world that she didn't notice the entire room had fallen silent. Then the clerk stood up, cleared his throat, and said loudly what everyone was waiting for. "All rise. The Circuit Court of Cook County is now in session, the Honorable Judge Elizabeth Morgan presiding." Veronica slowly looked up, as if she hadn't heard correctly, as if the words made no sense. Her eyes scanned the room, searching, trying to understand, until they finally found me. She saw me sitting there, in the robe, with my glasses in hand, with the same face she had insulted 10 minutes earlier outside the courthouse. Her face changed. First confusion, then disbelief, then panic. Her mouth fell slightly open, her hands dropped the papers she was holding, and for the first time since I've known her, Veronica Ashford was speechless. I didn't smile. I made no gesture. I just looked at her calmly, with the same calm I had maintained outside when she pushed me, when she insulted me, when she treated me like trash. Michael saw me too. He shot to his feet. His face reflected something I had never seen before. Fear, shame, total confusion. But I didn't give them time to process. I didn't give them time to react. I picked up the wooden gavel that lay to my right. I lifted it and brought it down on the desk with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. "This court is now in session," I said. Everyone stood. The entire courtroom rose to its feet. Everyone except Veronica. She was still sitting, paralyzed, her eyes fixed on me, as if she were seeing a ghost. I kept my gaze forward, professional, cold, exactly as I had done for 30 years. Exactly as I should have treated them from the beginning. "This is case number 37, Attorney Veronica Ashford representing the plaintiff. Are you ready to proceed?" Silence. Veronica didn't answer. She couldn't. She was still staring at me, as if the world had turned upside down. "Miss Ashford," I repeated, my voice firm. "I asked if you are ready to proceed." She flinched, swallowed hard, and tried to speak, but her voice came out broken. "Yes, Your Honor." "Your Honor." The same woman who, 10 minutes ago, called me a disgusting old hag now called me Your Honor. The same woman who pushed me against a wall was now trembling before me. And I, Elizabeth Morgan, 71 years old, mother of Michael, grandmother to 2 girls who barely know me, thought only one thing as I watched her fall apart. This is just the beginning. There was a time I believed that being a mother was enough, that being a grandmother was a gift, that my place in the family was secured simply by existing, by having given life, by being there every time they needed me. But it doesn't work that way. Not when your children grow up and forget where they came from. Not when they marry people who turn them into strangers. Michael was born when I was 26. His father, David, was a good man, hardworking and honest. He died of a heart attack when Michael was only 15. I was left alone with a teenage son, a house we were still paying the mortgage on, and bills that never stopped coming. But I didn't give up. I worked 2 jobs for years. I finished law school while Michael slept. I studied at the kitchen table until 3 a.m. with a cup of cold coffee beside me and books scattered everywhere. I graduated with honors. I got a job at the district attorney's office. I worked my way up. I became a judge at the age of 42. I did it all for him, to give him a better life, so he could go to a good university, so he would want for nothing. And Michael succeeded. He graduated from law school, opened his own firm, started making money, a lot of money. I was proud, so proud it hurt. I watched my son in expensive suits, driving a new car, eating at restaurants I'd never been to, and I thought it had all been worth it, that all those years of sacrifice had finally paid off. Then he met Veronica. The first time I saw her was at a Sunday dinner. Michael brought her over without warning. She arrived in a tight black dress, impossibly high heels, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Contempt sat down at my table. She looked around my house with an expression she couldn't quite hide, as if she were judging every old piece of furniture, every faded curtain, every chipped plate I had used for decades. I served the dinner I had prepared, roast chicken with potatoes and salad, nothing fancy, nothing sophisticated, just home-cooked food made with love. Veronica barely took 2 bites. She said it was delicious, but that she was watching her figure. Michael said nothing. He just ate in silence while she talked about her job, her important clients, the cases she'd won. That night, as they were leaving, I overheard Veronica talking to Michael at the door. She wasn't yelling, but her voice was clear, cold. "Your mother lives in this tiny house? Can't you do something about that? It makes a bad impression, Michael. People will think you don't care." Michael mumbled something I couldn't hear, but he didn't defend her. He didn't defend me. And I, standing on the other side of the door, with my hands still wet from washing dishes, felt something inside me crack. But I told myself it was just a first impression, that Veronica was nervous, that things would get better with time, that she just needed to get to know me. How naive I was. They got married 6 months later in a huge, ostentatious wedding at a ballroom that cost over $200,000. I wasn't consulted on a single thing. They didn't ask for my opinion. They just gave me the date and location. I sat in the 3rd row during the ceremony, behind Veronica's important friends, behind partners from Michael's law firm, like a regular guest, like someone who didn't really matter. After the wedding, everything changed. Michael started visiting less. The phone calls became shorter. The Sunday dinners we used to share gradually faded away. There was always an excuse: work, travel, social commitments. And when he did come, Veronica came with him, always critical, always pointing out what was wrong with my house. The walls needed painting, the furniture was outdated, the yard was neglected. I should hire someone to help. I should move to a smaller place. I should. She never asked how I was feeling. She never asked if I needed anything. She just pointed out my flaws as if they were obvious to everyone. Michael said nothing. He'd sit on the couch, looking at his phone, nodding distractedly while she spoke. And I would smile, nod, and thank her for the advice, even though it stung, because I thought if I was agreeable, if I was small, if I didn't cause problems, they would keep coming. I would still be a part of their lives. But every visit was worse than the last, every comment more painful, every silence from Michael heavier. Then the girls were born. First Natalie, then 2 years later, Olivia, my granddaughters. 2 beautiful creatures with Michael's eyes and David's smile. I thought everything would change. I thought being a grandmother would give me a new place in the family, a purpose, a reason for them to need me again. But Veronica wouldn't let me see them. There was always a reason. The girls were sick, they had activities, they were tired. Veronica preferred them to be with the other grandmother, her mother, who lived in a big house with a pool and staff. I sent them presents for their birthdays, dolls, books, clothes I carefully selected. I never got a thank you call, never saw a picture of them wearing what I sent. Just silence. One day I worked up the courage to ask Michael if I could take the girls to the park, just for a few hours, just to get to know them better, so they would know who their grandmother was. Michael was quiet for a long moment, then said he would talk to Veronica. That conversation never happened. Or if it did, the answer was no, because he never mentioned it again. And I didn't push, because I didn't want to be a bother. I didn't want to be the type of mother-in-law who causes problems. Years went by. I retired from the bench at 68. 30 years of service, hundreds of cases, thousands of decisions that changed lives. But on the day of my retirement ceremony, Michael didn't come. He said he had an important hearing. Veronica didn't even reply to my text. That afternoon I went home alone, with a commemorative plaque under my arm, a bouquet of flowers from my colleagues, and a heart so heavy I could barely breathe. And there, sitting in my empty living room, looking at the walls Veronica said needed painting, I made a decision. I wouldn't tell them I had been a judge. I wouldn't tell them about my career. I wouldn't show them my achievements. Because if 30 years of work didn't make Michael come to my retirement ceremony, nothing would. I would just be a mom, just a grandmother, just that simple woman who lived in a small house and didn't cause too much trouble. But that decision came with a price. Because the more invisible I became, the more they treated me like I didn't exist. Family gatherings at Michael's house became frequent. Elegant dinners, birthday parties for the girls, get-togethers with important friends. I was never invited. I would find out by accident, from a photo on social media, from a comment Michael let slip. Once, I showed up unannounced at one of those parties. It was Natalie's birthday. My granddaughter was turning 8. I rang the doorbell with a gift in my hands, a storybook I had spent weeks searching for in different bookstores. Veronica opened the door. She looked me up and down. She didn't let me in. "Elizabeth, I didn't know you were coming. This is just for immediate family and Natalie's friends. There's no room at the table." "I am family," I said. "I'm her grandmother." Veronica smiled. A cold, calculated smile. "Of course you are. But the child doesn't know you well. We don't want her to feel uncomfortable at her own party." She closed the door in my face. I stood there on the doorstep, gift in hand, listening to the sounds of laughter from inside, children's laughter, music, happiness, all on the other side of that closed door. I walked back to my house. I didn't take a taxi. I didn't call anyone. I just walked the 15 blocks back, with the book under my arm and tears streaming down my face. That night, I wondered what I had done wrong, at what point I had lost my son, at what point I had stopped mattering. But I found no answers, only a vast emptiness that grew with each passing day. Another 2 years passed. Nothing improved. In fact, it got worse. Michael stopped visiting altogether. The phone calls were reduced to 1 every 2 months. 5-minute conversations where he'd ask if everything was okay, and I'd say yes, even though it wasn't true. Then, 6 months ago, I found something that changed everything, something that woke me up from the quiet nightmare I was living. It was by chance. Michael came to my house because he needed some old documents. I was storing his father's life insurance papers. He was in a hurry. He left his phone on the kitchen table while he searched in the study, and the phone buzzed. It was a text message. The screen lit up, and I accidentally saw what it said. It was from Veronica. "I've already spoken with the lawyer. We can have her declared legally incompetent in 6 months. The house is worth $800K. We'll sell it and keep the money. She can go to a nursing home. She won't even realize." I read the message 3 times. 4. 5. The letters burned my eyes as if they were on fire. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move my fingers. I could only stand there, staring at that illuminated screen, at those cold, calculated words that had just shattered what was left of my world, declared legally incompetent, as if I were an object, as if, at 71, I no longer had a mind of my own, as if I couldn't make my own decisions, as if I were a burden to be discarded quickly and without guilt. The house is worth, this house, where I raised Michael, where I cried after David died, where I spent entire nights studying to become a judge, where I held every memory of my life. This house, which I paid for with my work, my effort, my own 2 hands. They wanted to sell it, keep the money, and send me to a nursing home like a piece of trash. I heard Michael's footsteps returning from the study. I picked up the phone and placed it exactly where it had been. I wiped a tear away with the back of my hand. I took a deep breath, and when he walked into the kitchen with the papers in his hand, I was pouring coffee as if nothing had happened. "Thanks, Mom. I have to go. Meeting in half an hour." "Of course, son. Drive safe." He gave me a kiss on the forehead, a quick, automatic, meaningless kiss. He took his phone, walked out, and I was left there, standing in my kitchen with a coffee cup trembling in my hand, feeling the ground give way beneath me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the lights off, staring into the darkness, trying to process what I had read, trying to understand how my own son could do something like this. How he could plan my life without consulting me, without asking me, without even having the decency to look me in the eye. But I already knew the answer. Michael wasn't the son I had raised. He wasn't the boy who cried in my arms when he had nightmares. He wasn't the teenager who hugged me when he missed his father. That Michael had disappeared years ago, replaced by a man who only looked ahead at money, at status, at whatever Veronica told him to look at. And Veronica, that woman who had swept into my life like a silent storm and destroyed everything in her path, was the architect of my pain, the one who whispered poison in my son's ear, the one who turned me into the enemy every time I opened my mouth. But there was something she didn't know. something Michael didn't know either. I was not a helpless old woman who would let herself be trampled on. I was not a woman without resources, without intelligence, without power. For 30 years I had been a judge. I had adjudicated cases of inheritance, fraud, family manipulation. I had seen children betray their parents, wives steal from their husbands, families destroy each other over money. And I had learned something fundamental. The law does not forgive those who act with malice, and justice, when applied correctly, can change everything. The next morning I called my lawyer, Arthur Friedman, a man I had met 20 years ago when I presided over his case. He had been unjustly accused of fraud. The evidence was weak, the prosecution was rushed, but I took the time to review every document, every testimony, and I discovered he was innocent. I acquitted him. I gave him a second chance, and he never forgot it. Every year on the anniversary of the verdict, he sent me a card of thanks. Every Christmas, I received a fruit basket with a handwritten note. And when I retired, he was one of the few who attended my ceremony. Arthur answered my call on the second ring. "Judge Morgan, what a surprise. How are you?" "I need your help, Arthur. It's urgent." We met in his office that same afternoon. I told him everything. The message I had seen, the years of contempt, Veronica's plan to have me declared incompetent. Arthur listened in silence, taking notes, shaking his head in disapproval. When I finished, he put his pen down on the desk and looked at me with those dark eyes that had seen too much in life. "Elizabeth, this is serious. But we have options, and we have time. If they try to declare you incompetent, they'll need medical evidence, psychological evaluations, testimonies. They can't just do it overnight." "I know, but I don't want to wait for them to try. I want to protect myself. I want that when the time comes, they don't stand a chance." Arthur nodded. "Then we will fortify you. Legally, medically, emotionally. We'll get evaluations of your mental health, certificates of your cognitive abilities. We'll revise your will and make sure that no one, absolutely no one, can touch you without your consent." And that's what we did. Over the next few weeks, I underwent neurological exams, memory tests, full psychological evaluations. The results were impeccable. My mind was perfectly sound. My decision-making capacity was intact. Any judge who reviewed those documents would come to the same conclusion. There was no way I could be declared incompetent. Arthur also revised my will. We rewrote it completely. Michael was still my heir, but with conditions. He could not sell the house without my express consent. He could not make decisions about my health without my permission. He could not receive a single penny until I died. And if he tried to manipulate my will while I was alive, he would lose everything. I signed every document with a steady hand, without hesitation, without tears. Because this was no longer about pain, it was about survival. But I didn't stop there. I started an investigation. Arthur hired a private investigator, a discreet man who had worked on similar cases. We asked him to look into Veronica, to check her finances, her legal cases, her movements, and what we found was worse than I had imagined. Veronica had been embezzling money from the law firm she shared with Michael for years. Small amounts at first, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, but over time, the sums grew. $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 disappearing into fictitious accounts. Michael knew nothing, or pretended not to know, but the evidence was there. Bank transfers, receipts, emails where Veronica talked to her accountant about how to hide the money, how to disguise it as operational costs. We also discovered that Veronica had debts, a lot of debts. Credit cards maxed out at $120,000, unpaid personal loans. And worst of all, she had taken out a second mortgage on the house she lived in with Michael, without his knowledge. She had forged his signature. She used the firm's letterhead to make it look legitimate. The woman was desperate, and my house, my inheritance, was her lifeline. That's why she wanted me declared incompetent. That's why she wanted to sell it quickly. Because she needed the money before everything collapsed. Arthur organized all the documents into a thick binder. The evidence of embezzlement, the evidence of forgery, the evidence of fraud. Enough to ruin Veronica's career. Enough to put her in serious legal trouble, but I didn't want to use it yet, not right away. Because there was something else I wanted, something more important than legal justice. I wanted them to know who I was. I wanted them to see me, to really see me. Not as the annoying old woman who got in the way of their perfect life, but as the woman I had always been, the judge, the professional, the one who had decided cases more complex than anything they had ever touched. Arthur looked at me with curiosity when I told him my plan. "Are you sure, Elizabeth? This could be risky. If they suspect something beforehand, they might change their strategy." "I'm sure. Trust me, Arthur. I know what I'm doing." And I did know, because I had spent 3 decades doing exactly this: planning, strategizing, waiting for the perfect moment to act. Arthur made some calls, called his contacts at the courthouse. He asked about upcoming cases where Veronica was involved as an attorney, and he found one, a big one, an important case Veronica had been preparing for months. It was a commercial dispute, one company suing another for breach of contract. $5 million was at stake. Veronica was representing the plaintiff, and she needed to win, because if she lost, her reputation would be tarnished. Clients would start to doubt her, and with the debts she had, she couldn't afford that luxury. The trial was scheduled for 3 weeks from then, a Tuesday morning, in Courtroom 3. Arthur smiled when he told me, "Guess who was assigned as the judge for this case?" I smiled too, for the first time in months. A real smile. A smile that came from some deep place I thought was dead. "Tell me." "Patricia, your old clerk. She's in charge of assignments now, and when she saw the case, she thought maybe you'd be interested in coming back, just this once, as a visiting judge. A special favor." "Patricia did that?" "Yes. She always held you in very high regard, Elizabeth. And when I told her what was happening, without going into details, she understood. She said it would be an honor to have you back, even if it was just for 1 day." I accepted. Of course I accepted. Because this was more than a legal case. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when everything would change. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing. I reviewed every document of the case, every argument, every legal precedent. I made sure I knew every detail better than the lawyers themselves. I also prepared myself emotionally, because I knew that when Veronica saw me sitting in that chair, when Michael finally understood who his mother was, everything would explode, and I had to be ready. I had to be strong. I had to remain calm, even if I was shaking inside. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, going over every word I would say, every gesture I would make. I thought of David, how proud he would be, how he would have hugged me and told me I did the right thing. And I thought of Michael, the boy he was, the man he had become. And I wondered if there was anything left of the son I loved inside that stranger who was planning to lock me away. At 6 a.m., I got up, showered, and got dressed in simple clothes, a beige sweater, dark pants, flat shoes. I wanted to look exactly as they expected me to. Fragile, insignificant, invisible. I took a taxi to the courthouse. I arrived early. I stood outside, looking at that building where I had spent so many years of my life, where I had made decisions that changed destinies, where I had been someone important. And then I saw them arrive. First Michael, in his gray suit, with a leather briefcase, a serious expression. And behind him Veronica, in a black dress, high heels, with that arrogant smile I knew so well. They didn't see me at first. They were walking quickly, talking to each other. Veronica was saying something about the case, about how she was going to destroy the opposing side, about how this victory would open important doors for them. Then they saw me, and everything changed. Veronica stopped abruptly when she saw me standing near the courthouse entrance. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe with that contempt I knew so well. Michael looked away, embarrassed, as he always was when he knew something was wrong but didn't want to confront it. "Elizabeth, what are you doing here?" It wasn't a question, it was an accusation, as if I had no right to be in this public place, as if my mere presence were an offense. "Good morning, Veronica." "Good morning, Michael." My voice was calm, controlled, exactly as I had practiced. Michael mumbled a barely audible greeting. Veronica didn't even respond. She just stared at me with those cold eyes that seemed to be calculating how long it would take to get rid of me. "Do you have some paperwork to file? Because if you need legal help, you can go somewhere else. We have an important hearing." I smiled. A small, controlled smile. I know, good luck with the case. Veronica frowned, confused, probably wondering how I knew about her case, but I didn't give her time to ask. I turned and started walking toward the entrance, and that's when it happened. Veronica caught up to me in 3 strides. She grabbed my arm hard. Her fingers dug into my skin like talons. Wait. Why are you really here? Did you come to bother us? To embarrass us in front of important people? Her voice rose. People started to turn and look. Lawyers, clerks, security guards, all witnesses to what was about to happen. Veronica, please, let me go. No. I want to know what you're doing here. You always show up where you're not wanted. You always interfere. You always ruin everything. She shoved me, not hard enough to make me fall, but hard enough that I stumbled back and hit the wall. My back hit the cold concrete. A jolt of pain shot through my old bones. Michael was still standing 10 feet away, watching, doing nothing. You're a disgrace, Elizabeth. A disgusting old hag who doesn't know when to disappear. Look at you, in those horrible clothes, with that neglected hair. You're pathetic. You're an embarrassment to your own son. That's why we never invite you anywhere, because you embarrass us. The words poured out of her mouth like venom, and each one stabbed me in the chest. But I didn't answer. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at her, memorizing every detail of her face, every cruel gesture, because I knew that in a few minutes, everything would change. Veronica let go of me with one last push. She shook her hands as if she had just touched something dirty. Michael finally walked over, but not to me, to her. He put a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support, of complicity. Let's go, Veronica. We're going to be late. She nodded, gave me one last look of contempt, and they both walked toward the courthouse entrance without looking back. I stood there for a few more seconds, breathing, feeling the sting on my cheek where her hand had struck me, feeling the ache in my back where I had hit the wall, feeling every cell in my body screaming for justice. Then, I moved. Not through the main doors, not behind them. I turned into the side corridor, the one only the judges used. The one that led directly to the private chambers. Patricia was waiting for me. She hugged me as soon as she saw me. Elizabeth, you're trembling. Are you all right? I'm perfectly fine, Patricia. Thank you for this, for everything. She led me to the robing room. She helped me take off the beige sweater. She reached for the black robe hanging in the locker with my name on it, Elizabeth Morgan, Judge. I put it on slowly, feeling the familiar weight of the fabric, feeling something inside me awaken after years of being dormant. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was dignity. It was a reminder of who I had always been, of who I still was, despite everything. Patricia looked at me with tears in her eyes. We miss you here, Elizabeth. This place isn't the same without you. I've missed you all too. I adjusted the robe, put on my glasses, and looked at myself in the mirror, 71 years old. Gray hair, wrinkles that told a story of pain and resilience, but also of strength, wisdom, and authority. I'm ready. Patricia walked me to the door of Courtroom 3. Before I entered, she squeezed my hand. Show them who you are, Elizabeth. Let them see. I will. I pushed the door open. A bailiff greeted me respectfully, cleared a path, and I walked into that room I knew by heart, where I had spent thousands of hours, where I had changed lives with my decisions. The room was full. Veronica was in the front row, looking over papers, talking to her assistant, so confident, so sure of her victory. Michael was further back, alone, waiting, not imagining what was about to happen. I walked up the 3 steps to the bench. I sat down in the high-back chair. I placed my hands on the desk. I took a deep breath, and I waited. The murmur in the room continued until someone looked up, until the silence began to spread like an oil slick. Veronica still didn't see me, focused on her documents, in her perfect world that was about to collapse. The clerk stood up, cleared his throat. All rise. The Circuit Court of Cook County is now in session, the Honorable Judge Elizabeth Morgan presiding. And that's when Veronica looked up. And when she saw me, her entire world came to a halt. Veronica's face went through a dozen emotions in a few seconds. First confusion, then disbelief, then pure panic. Her mouth fell slightly open, but no sound came out. The papers she was holding in her hands fell to the floor with a dry sound that echoed in the absolute silence of the room. Michael shot to his feet so quickly that his chair tipped over backward. His face lost all color. He stared at me as if he were seeing a ghost, as if the world he knew had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. I said nothing yet. I just watched them calmly, with the same composure I had maintained for 30 years in that place. The same one I used to face aggressive lawyers, lying witnesses, and impossible cases. The clerk spoke again, his voice cutting through the thick silence. "Everyone please remain standing to welcome the court." The entire room stood, everyone except Veronica. She was still sitting, paralyzed, her eyes fixed on me, as if she couldn't process what she was seeing. Her assistant had to touch her arm twice before she finally reacted and stood up on trembling legs. "Good morning. Please be seated." My voice was firm, clear, exactly as it should be. The room obeyed. The sound of bodies sitting in chairs filled the space for a moment. I opened the file that was in front of me. Case number 18C-V4522, Buto Lynn Valley Enterprises versus Cedillo Urban Developments. Contract dispute for breach of clauses. Claim amount, $5 million. I looked up. Attorney Veronica Ashford, representing the plaintiff. Attorney Cesare Wachik, representing the defendant. Are both parties present and ready to proceed? The defense attorney responded immediately. "Yes, Your Honor." Veronica was still silent. Her assistant nudged her discreetly. She blinked, swallowed hard. She tried to speak, but her voice came out broken, barely a whisper. "Yes, I apologize, Your Honor." "Miss Ashford, I didn't hear you. Are you ready to proceed?" My tone was professional, neutral, exactly the same I would use with any lawyer, but my eyes were looking straight at her, and she knew. She knew that I knew. She knew this was no coincidence. "Yes, Your Honor, I am ready." "Excellent. Then let's begin. Miss Ashford, you may present your opening arguments." Veronica stood up. Her hands were shaking as she gathered the papers from the floor. Some fell again. Her assistant bent down to help her. The entire room watched, some with curiosity, others with embarrassment. Everyone sensed that something was out of place. Veronica finally managed to stand before the bench. She took a deep breath, trying to regain that arrogant confidence that characterized her, but she couldn't. Her voice was uncertain, halting. "Your Honor, my client, Buto Lynn Valley Enterprises, signed a contract with Cedillo Urban Developments for the amount of $1.2 million. I stopped her. I raised my hand. "I'm sorry, Miss Ashford. According to the documents I have before me, the contract was for $1.5 million, not $1.2 million. Veronica turned even paler. She searched frantically through her papers. "Yes, you are correct, Your Honor. My apologies. $1.5 million. Please continue." She tried to continue, but her concentration was shattered. She mixed up dates. She mentioned incorrect clauses. She forgot fundamental details that any competent lawyer should know by heart for a case they had been preparing for months. I corrected her each time, patiently, professionally, but also firmly. Exactly as I would with any lawyer who came unprepared to my courtroom. Michael was still sitting in the back. I could see him out of the corner of my eye. He had his head in his hands. His world was collapsing. Everything he thought he knew about his mother, about his life, about reality itself, was falling apart. After 20 minutes of disastrous arguments, I stopped Veronica. "Miss Ashford, I see you are having difficulty presenting your arguments in a coherent manner. Do you need a recess?" "No, Your Honor. I can continue." "Are you sure? Because if you are not properly prepared for this case, I can postpone the hearing." I saw the panic in her eyes. A postponement meant an admission of incompetence. It meant her client would lose confidence. It meant the end of her reputation. "I am prepared, Your Honor." "In that case, I suggest you focus on the facts and stop wasting the court's time with basic errors." "Your Honor?" The humiliation on her face was evident. This woman who, less than an hour ago, had called me a disgusting old hag, was now being reprimanded by me in front of a room full of professionals. This woman who had pushed me against a wall was now trembling under my gaze, but I felt no satisfaction. Not yet. This wasn't personal revenge. This was justice. This was showing them who I really was. Not the weak mother they thought I was, not the old woman who got in the way, but a respected professional, a judge who had earned her place through work and sacrifice. Veronica finally finished her opening argument. She sat down, her face red with shame. Her assistant whispered something in her ear, but she didn't respond. She just stared straight ahead with a blank expression. "Mr. Wojcik, your opening arguments, please." The defense attorney stood. He presented his arguments clearly, organized, professionally, everything Veronica had failed to do. The difference was abysmal. When he finished, I reviewed my notes, I analyzed the documents, and then I said something I knew would destroy Veronica. "Miss Ashford, I have reviewed the documents you presented, and I note several inconsistencies. The dates on some of the contracts do not match the testimonies you mention. The amounts you are claiming are not supported by the attached invoices, and there are 3 clauses that your argument directly contradicts." I paused. I looked directly at her. "Can you explain these inconsistencies?" Veronica stood up clumsily. She opened and closed her mouth several times. She searched frantically through her papers, but she had no answer. Because the truth was, she had prepared the case half-heartedly, confident in her ability to improvise, to manipulate, to win with arrogance instead of work. I would have to review my files, Your Honor." "You should have reviewed your files before coming to my courtroom, Miss Ashford. This court does not tolerate professional negligence." The silence that followed was overwhelming. Everyone in the room knew what had just happened. Veronica Ashford, the arrogant lawyer who thought she was invincible, had just been exposed as incompetent by the judge who turned out to be her own mother-in-law. Suddenly, Michael stood up. He almost ran out of the room. The doors closed behind him with a dry thud. Veronica watched him go, and in her eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. Real fear. Because she knew that Michael had just understood everything. That his mother was not who he thought she was, and that his wife had just humiliated herself in front of the woman they had planned to destroy. "We will take a 30-minute recess. After that time, I expect both parties to be ready to proceed professionally. The hearing will resume at 11 a.m. I struck the gavel on the desk. The sound echoed through the room like thunder. "Court is in recess." The room slowly emptied. Veronica remained in her seat, motionless, with a lost look. Her assistant tried to talk to her, but she didn't respond. I descended from the bench. I walked toward my temporary chambers with my back straight and my head held high. Each step echoed in the empty corridor, and as I walked, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: power, dignity, and the absolute certainty that this was just the beginning. The 30-minute recess felt like an eternity. I sat in the small office Patricia had prepared for me, looking out the window at the courthouse parking lot. From there, I could see Michael pacing next to his car, phone pressed to his ear. He gestured with his free hand, ran his fingers through his hair, looking desperate. Patricia came in with a cup of hot tea. "How are you feeling, Elizabeth?" "Like I've just woken up from a 3-year sleep." She gave a sad smile. "The whole courthouse is talking. No one can believe you're Veronica Ashford's mother-in-law. Some of the younger lawyers didn't even know you had been a judge here." I sipped the tea slowly, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. Outside, Michael had stopped pacing. He was now sitting on the hood of his car, head in his hands, a broken man. A part of me wanted to go out, to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay. But another part, the one that had awakened when I read that text message, knew this was necessary. That I couldn't keep being the mother who made herself small so they could feel big. Patricia came to the window and followed my gaze. "Do you think he knew who you were?" "No. Michael never asked about my work. He was never interested in what I did when I wasn't with him. When he finished school, I was already a judge, but he was so busy building his own career that he never looked back. He never saw the woman who sacrificed everything so he could have that career. That must have hurt you deeply." "It hurt for years, but it doesn't hurt anymore. Now I just feel clarity." The clock struck 10:50. It was time to go back. Patricia helped me adjust my robe. I took one last look at myself in the small mirror on the wall. The eyes that looked back were no longer those of a broken woman. They were the eyes of a judge, of someone who had reclaimed her identity. I returned to the courtroom through the same side corridor. When I entered, everyone was already in their places. Veronica had regained some composure. She had fixed her makeup, straightened her back, but her eyes still held a barely contained panic. Michael was back. He was sitting in the same spot as before, but now he looked at me differently, no longer with indifference. Now with something I couldn't quite decipher. Astonishment, shame, fear. I ascended to the bench, sat down, and struck the gavel once. This court is now back in session. Miss Court is now back in session. Ashford, you have the floor. I trust you have used the recess to better organize your arguments. Veronica stood up. This time she was holding a new folder that her assistant had surely prepared during the break. She took a deep breath and began to speak with more control than before. Your Honor, my client fulfilled all obligations stipulated in the contract. They delivered the materials on the agreed-upon dates. Payments were made according to the established schedule. However, the defendant failed to fulfill their obligation to begin construction within 90 days, as per Clause 7.3. Better. Much better than before. But I had already reviewed the entire case during the recess. I knew every detail, every weak point in her argument. I listened to her for 15 minutes, taking notes. And when she finished, I began to ask questions. Specific questions. Questions that any judge would ask in a case like this. Nothing personal, nothing outside of professional conduct. Miss Ashford, you mentioned that your client fulfilled all obligations. However, according to the construction engineer's deposition, which is on page 42 of the documents, there was a 3-week delay in the delivery of materials. Can you explain this discrepancy? I saw Veronica frantically search for that page, her hands trembling as she flipped through the documents, her confidence crumbling again. That delay was due to circumstances beyond my client's control, Your Honor. A problem with the supplier. Do you have documentation to support that claim? I would have to check. Miss Ashford, I remind you that this is a trial, not an informal meeting. You are expected to have all necessary documentation at hand. If you do not have it, please state so clearly. I do not have that documentation at this time, Your Honor. In that case, your argument that your client fulfilled all obligations remains unsubstantiated. Please proceed with your other points. Veronica's face flushed with shame, with contained rage, but there was nothing she could do. She was in my courtroom, under my rules, and the rules were the same for everyone. The defense attorney, Cesare Wojcik, capitalized on every one of Veronica's mistakes. He presented solid evidence, verifiable testimonies, signed contracts that contradicted what she claimed. He was a competent professional, facing someone who relied too heavily on her arrogance. After 2 hours of testimony, I had enough information. Both sides had presented their cases. Now it was time for deliberation. I will take a 1-hour recess. After that time, I will announce my verdict. Court is in recess. I struck the gavel. The room began to empty. Veronica remained in her seat, her head bowed. Her assistant spoke to her quietly, but she didn't seem to hear. Michael approached her, placed a hand on her shoulder. Veronica looked up and said something I couldn't hear. But I saw Michael shake his head, pull his hand back, and for the first time in years, he wasn't on her side. I returned to my chambers. Arthur Friedman was waiting for me. He had been in the courtroom the whole time, sitting discreetly in the back row. Elizabeth, you handled that perfectly. Professional, impartial. No one can say you acted with favoritism or malice. I acted solely according to the law, Arthur, as always. I know. But I also know this must be difficult for you. They're your family. They were my family. Now, I don't know what they are. Arthur placed the thick binder with all the evidence we had collected on the desk. The embezzlement, the debts, the forged mortgage. Everything. Are you going to use this? Not today. Today, I am simply going to do my job as a judge. I will deliver a verdict based on the evidence presented. Nothing more, nothing less. And after? We'll see about after. But they need to know they can't play games with me anymore, that I am not the helpless old woman they thought I was. I spent that hour reviewing every document of the case one more time, taking notes, analyzing the arguments of both sides. And although Veronica was part of my family, although every emotional fiber of my being wanted to punish her for all the harm she had caused me, my duty as a judge was more important. The evidence was clear. Veronica's case had huge gaps, inconsistencies she couldn't explain, a lack of crucial documentation. Her client had breached the contract first, even though she claimed otherwise. My decision was made. I wrote it down on 2 pages. Clear, reasoned, fair. When the clock struck 1:30 p.m., I returned to the courtroom. Everyone was already waiting. The silence was absolute. Veronica had her fists clenched on the table. Michael was as pale as a ghost. I sat down, struck the gavel. I have carefully reviewed all the evidence presented by both parties. I have analyzed the testimonies, the contracts, and the attached documentation. And I have reached a conclusion. I paused. I looked directly at Veronica. The plaintiff, represented by attorney Veronica Ashford, has failed to prove with sufficient evidence that the defendant breached the contract. On the contrary, the evidence presented by the defense indicates that it was the plaintiff who first breached the contract by failing to deliver materials within the established deadlines. Therefore, this court rules in favor of the defendant. The claim is dismissed. Court costs will be borne by the plaintiff. The crack of the gavel sounded like a thunderclap in the silent room. Veronica literally collapsed. Her body slumped over the table. Her assistant had to hold her up. She had lost. And she hadn't just lost a case. She had lost her reputation. Because everyone in that room now knew that she had been defeated by her own mother-in-law, the disgusting old hag she had humiliated that very morning. Michael had his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. And I, sitting in the judge's chair, in my robe, with my dignity intact, felt only one thing: peace. The courtroom slowly emptied. The defense attorney shook his client's hand with a smile of satisfaction. Assistants gathered documents. Bailiffs opened doors for people to leave. But Veronica was still sitting there, her gaze lost somewhere on the wall. Michael finally approached her. He spoke to her quietly. He tried to take her arm to help her up, but Veronica pulled away with a violent movement. She stood up on her own, swaying slightly on her high heels. Then she looked directly at me. And in her eyes, I saw something beyond panic and shame. I saw pure hatred, unfiltered, unmasked. She walked toward the bench. Her assistant tried to stop her, but she broke free. She climbed 2 of the 3 steps that separated her from me. A bailiff took a step forward, but I raised my hand to stop him. Veronica stood there, looking up at me, her face contorted with rage. This was planned. You did this on purpose. You've been lying to us your whole life. You never told us you were a judge. Why? So you could humiliate me now? Her voice was trembling, but not with fear. With the fury that had been contained throughout the hearing, which was now exploding. I didn't lie to anyone, Veronica. You simply never asked. My son was never interested in knowing what I did for a living. You never showed any interest in really knowing me. You only cared that I was small, invisible, convenient. You're a manipulator. You spent all this time pretending to be a weak old woman so we would let our guard down. I stood up slowly, without rushing. I looked down at her. I didn't pretend to be weak. You assumed I was. There's a difference. And today, you didn't lose because I wanted revenge. You lost because you came unprepared, because you relied on your arrogance instead of your work. This defeat is entirely yours. Veronica clenched her fists. For a moment, I thought she would try to hit me again, but the bailiff moved closer, and she realized where she was, that there was nothing more she could do. This isn't over. I'll appeal. I'll prove there was a conflict of interest, that you couldn't be the judge in a case where I was the attorney. Go ahead and appeal, but I warn you, the entire proceeding was recorded. Every word, every decision, and any judge who reviews this case will come to the same conclusion. You lost because your case was weak, not because I was your mother-in-law. Veronica descended the steps, walked with quick strides toward the exit. Her assistant followed, carrying all the folders. When she reached the door, she stopped, turned around one last time. Michael deserves better than a mother like you. The words should have hurt me. A few months ago, they would have destroyed me. But now, I just let them float in the air, without weight, without power. Michael deserves a mother who doesn't have to hide to be loved, and a wife who doesn't manipulate him to get what she wants. But those are decisions he will have to make for himself. Veronica slammed the door. The sound echoed in the now empty room. Michael was still sitting in his place, motionless, as if he couldn't decide what to do, where to go, who to believe. I descended from the bench. I slowly took off my robe, folding it carefully. Patricia appeared at the door. "Do you need anything, Elizabeth?" "No, thank you, Patricia. I'm done here." I walked toward the exit. I had to pass by Michael. As I reached him, he stood up. We looked at each other for the first time in years. Really looked. Without Veronica between us, without excuses, without lies. "Mom." His voice broke. I saw tears in his eyes, but I didn't stop. Not yet. Because there were things that needed to be said, and this was not the time or place. "Michael, when you're ready to have a real conversation, you know where I live. In that little house your wife is so ashamed of. In that house you were planning to sell out from under me without asking." His face turned even paler. "How do you know?" "I saw Veronica's text on your phone 6 months ago. About declaring me incompetent, selling my house, putting me in a home. All planned without my knowledge, without my consent." Michael stumbled back as if I had slapped him. "That wasn't... She was just..." "Just what, Michael? Planning my life without consulting me? Stealing my dignity? And you? Did you just go along with it, not defending me, not even asking if I agreed?" He didn't answer. He slumped back into his chair, his hands covering his face. "I wanted to have this conversation another time. I wanted to give you time to process everything you've just discovered about me. But you need to know something now. I am not the enemy. I never was. I was just a mother who loved her son so much that she made herself invisible so as not to bother him. And that was my mistake. Mom, I didn't know. I didn't know you were a judge. I didn't know how important you were. I didn't know anything." "Exactly. You didn't know because you never asked. Because you assumed my life began and ended with being your mother. Because Veronica convinced you I was an obstacle, and you believed her." I slung the robe over my arm. I took a step toward the door, but Michael stopped me. "What do I do now?" I turned to look at him. My son, the boy I had raised alone, the man he had become, whom I no longer recognized. "You decide, Michael. You decide if you want to continue being the man who lets his wife humiliate his mother, or if you want to recover some part of the person you used to be. But that decision is yours, not mine. I can't make it for you anymore." I left the courtroom. Patricia was waiting for me in the hallway with a sad smile. "You were incredible, Elizabeth. Everyone is talking about you. They say you're as brilliant a judge as ever." "I don't feel brilliant, Patricia. I feel tired." She hugged me, and for the first time all day, I let myself feel the weight of what had just happened, of what I had to do, of how I had exposed my own family in front of strangers. But I also felt something else. I felt I had recovered something I had lost years ago. My voice, my identity, my power. Arthur was waiting for me in the lobby. When he saw me, he smiled. "Judge Morgan, it was an honor to see you in action again." "Thank you, Arthur, for everything, for helping me get here. What's next?" I took out my phone, dialed a number I had saved for months, the number of a reporter from the local newspaper. She had covered many of my cases when I was active. She knew my reputation. She answered on the third ring. "Judge Morgan? I can't believe it's you. I thought you were fully retired." "I was, but I came back today for a special case, and I think I have a story that might interest you." I told her everything, not the personal details, but the facts. The respected retired judge coming back for one day. The arrogant lawyer who turned out to be her daughter-in-law. The trial where professionalism defeated arrogance. The fair verdict despite the family ties. The reporter listened in silence. I could hear her pen scratching notes on the other side of the line. "This is going on the front page tomorrow. This is exactly the kind of story people need to read. Just make sure it's accurate. I don't want unnecessary drama, just the truth." "The truth itself is dramatic enough, Judge." I hung up the phone. Arthur looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Are you sure you want to make this public?" "Absolutely sure, because if I don't, Veronica will tell her version. She'll say I was unfair, that I abused my power, that I persecuted her out of revenge. And I am not going to give her that chance." We left the courthouse together. The afternoon sun hit my face. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth on my skin. When I opened them, I saw Michael standing by his car, alone. Veronica was gone. He was looking at me from a distance, as if he wanted to approach but didn't know how. I looked at him, and then I turned and walked toward the taxi Arthur had called. I had spent 30 years of my life putting Michael first, sacrificing myself, making myself small, hoping he would see me. But today, for the first time in decades, I had put myself first, and I felt free. The story hit the front page of the newspaper the next morning. The headline was simple but powerful. Retired judge returns to deliver justice in case involving her own daughter-in-law. The accompanying photo was of me from my years on the bench, in my robe, with the serious expression I always use during hearings. The article was accurate, professional. It detailed my 30-year career as a judge, the important cases I had decided, my impeccable reputation. And then it recounted what had happened the day before, how Veronica Ashford had lost an important case before the judge who turned out to be her mother-in-law, how the trial had been recorded and reviewed by other judges who confirmed the entire proceeding was impartial and fair. The reporter had also obtained statements from lawyers present in the courtroom. They all agreed on the same thing. Miss Ashford had arrived unprepared. Her arguments had huge gaps. The verdict was correct, based solely on the evidence presented. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. Old colleagues, judges I had worked with, professors from the law school, all calling to congratulate me, to tell me they missed me, to ask if I would consider coming back, even as a consultant. At 9 a.m., the phone at Michael's firm also started ringing, but those calls were very different. Clients asking why Veronica Ashford was still working there after such a public humiliation. Partners concerned about the firm's reputation. Young lawyers whispering in the hallways. Arthur arrived at my house at 10 a.m. with another binder. This time it wasn't about a court case. It was about something much more serious. "Elizabeth, we need to talk about what we found. We can't wait any longer." He opened the binder on my kitchen table. Bank documents, wire transfers, emails, all the evidence of Veronica's fraud. $200,000 embezzled from the firm, hidden debts, the forged mortgage on Michael's house, and there's more. I spoke with a friend on the State Bar Association. Veronica has 3 formal complaints against her for negligence, cases where she didn't show up for hearings, clients she never called back, documents she never prepared. Does Michael know any of this? I don't think so. I've reviewed everything, and it looks like Veronica managed the firm's finances by herself. Michael signed whatever she put in front of him without checking. He trusted her completely. Until yesterday. Exactly. Until yesterday. The doorbell rang. Arthur and I exchanged a look. I wasn't expecting visitors. I cautiously approached the door and looked through the peephole. It was Michael. He was standing on my doorstep, with the newspaper folded under his arm, deep shadows under his eyes, and his suit rumpled as if he had slept in it, if he had slept at all. I slowly opened the door. "Michael? Mom, can I come in?" I stepped aside. He walked in and stopped when he saw Arthur sitting at the kitchen table with the documents spread out. His face went pale. "What is all this?" Arthur started to gather the papers, but I stopped him. "Leave them, Arthur. Michael has a right to know." My son approached the table, looked at the documents, the numbers, the emails. He picked one up, then another. His hands started to shake. This is from the firm. These are our accounts. Why do you have this?" "Because I had to protect myself, Michael. When I found out you were planning to have me declared incompetent and sell my house, I hired Arthur to investigate, and we found a lot more than we expected." Michael read in silence for several minutes. I watched as his expression changed from confusion to disbelief, and then to pure horror. $200,000. She took $200,000? And this mortgage. My signature is here, but I never signed this. "It's a forgery," Arthur said quietly. "Veronica took out a second mortgage on your house without your consent. She used the money to pay off her own debts." Michael collapsed into a chair. He dropped the papers on the table as if they burned him. "I can't believe this. All this time, I thought we were building something together. I thought she loved me." I sat down across from him. For the first time in years, it was just us, without Veronica between us, without lies, without pretense. "Michael, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Anything, Mom. Did you really want to have me declared incompetent? Or was it all her idea?" He looked up, tears streaming down his face. She told me you were losing your memory, that you were forgetting things, that one day she found you lost on the street, not remembering how you got there. She said you were becoming a danger to yourself, that it was for your own good. That never happened, Michael. Never. My mind is perfectly fine. I have recent medical evaluations to prove it. Veronica made all that up to convince you I was incompetent. But why? Why would she do something like that? I showed him the documents of her debts, the overdue loans, the foreclosure threats, the calls from collection agencies, because she was desperate for money. And my house, worth $800,000, was her salvation. But to get it, she had to get me out of the way first. Michael put his head in his hands. His whole body was shaking. My God, what have I done? I abandoned you. I left you alone. I let her treat you like trash. And all this time, you are a judge, a respected professional, a woman who sacrificed everything to give me a better life. Yes, Michael, that's who I am. Why did you never tell me? Because I wanted you to love me for being your mother, not for being important, not for having a title, just for being me. But I was wrong. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. Silence filled the kitchen. Arthur remained quiet, giving us space. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice hoarse. What are you going to do with all this? With the evidence of fraud? With the forgery? That decision is yours, Michael. You are her husband. You are her partner in the firm. If you present this evidence, Veronica will lose her license to practice law. She will probably face criminal charges. Your reputation will also suffer because you are her partner. But if you do nothing, she will continue to destroy everything she touches. I can't. I need time to think. You don't have much time. The Bar Association's auditors are already looking into the firm because of the complaints against her. They will eventually find the missing money. It's better if you get ahead of it. Michael stood up, walked to the window, looked out without really seeing anything. I loved her, Mom. Or I thought I did. Now I don't know what was real and what was a lie. I went to him, put a hand on his shoulder. He felt thinner, more fragile than I remembered. Sometimes the people we love are not who we think they are, and accepting that hurts more than anything. But you have to make a decision, son. Are you going to protect her, or are you going to protect yourself? Michael turned to look at me, and in his eyes, I saw the boy again, scared, lost, looking for guidance. What would you do? I already made my decision. I protected myself, I defended myself, and I recovered my dignity. Now it's your turn to do the same. He nodded slowly. He took the documents from the table, tucked them under his arm. I'm going to talk to the auditors. I'm going to give them everything, and I'm going to divorce Veronica. The words sounded firm, decided. For the first time in years, my son was making a decision for himself. And the girls? I asked quietly. The girls are going to get to know their real grandmother. Not the small, insignificant Elizabeth that Veronica wanted you to be. The real woman, the judge, the fighter. Michael came over and hugged me, a long, tight hug full of years of distance and regret. Forgive me, Mom, for everything. I returned the hug, feeling something inside me that had been broken for so long finally start to heal. 3 months later, my life was completely different. Michael presented all the evidence of fraud to the State Bar Association and the appropriate authorities. Veronica lost her license to practice law. She was charged with forgery and embezzlement. The firm had to temporarily close while audits were conducted, but Michael managed to save it, completely disassociating himself from her and returning the stolen money from his own savings. The divorce was quick. Veronica didn't fight. She had nothing to fight with. Her reputation was destroyed, her debts were chasing her, and worst of all, she had lost the control she had always had over Michael. I didn't attend any of the divorce hearings. Not because I didn't care, but because it was no longer my fight. It was Michael's, and he had to face it alone. But what I did do was open the doors of my house. Literally. One Saturday afternoon, Michael arrived with Natalie and Olivia, my granddaughters. It was the first time I had seen them in over a year. Natalie was now 10, Olivia was 8. 2 beautiful girls with curious eyes and shy smiles. Girls, this is your grandmother, your real grandmother. Natalie looked at me with fascination. She had read the newspaper article. Michael had shown it to her. Were you really a judge, Grandma? For real? I really was. For 30 years. And you decided who won and who lost. I knelt down to their level. Not exactly. I listened to both sides. I reviewed the evidence. And then I made the fairest decision I could, according to the law. Olivia, the youngest, approached shyly. Mom always said that you weren't important. I took her small hand in mine. Your mom was wrong about a lot of things, but that doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that now we can get to know each other. Would you like that? They both nodded. And that day, I baked cookies with them. I showed them pictures of Michael when he was a boy. I told them stories about their grandfather David. I talked to them about cases I had decided, adapting the stories for their age. And for the first time in years, my house was filled with laughter, with life, with a real family. Michael was quiet most of the time. He just watched, with tears in his eyes that he would discreetly wipe away when he thought no one was looking. Before they left, he hugged me at the door. Thank you, Mom, for not giving up, for being stronger than all of us combined. I wasn't strong, Michael. I just stopped pretending to be weak. The following weeks turned into months, and slowly, we built something new. Michael would come for Sunday dinner with the girls. We would talk, really talk, about his work, his fears, about how to rebuild his life. I started to rebuild mine too. I agreed to give some lectures at the law school on judicial ethics, on how to maintain impartiality even in difficult personal situations. The students listened to me with respect, with admiration. I also agreed to work as a mediator in family dispute cases. It turned out that my personal experience gave me a unique perspective. I could see both sides, understand the pain of abandoned parents and the confusion of manipulated children. Arthur became a close friend. We had lunch together once a week. We talked about cases, about life, about second chances. One day, he said something I'll never forget. Elizabeth, when I met you 20 years ago, you gave me my life back. Now I feel honored to have helped you get yours back. Patricia also came back into my life. She retired from the courthouse, but we would meet for coffee. She would tell me gossip about the new judges. I would tell her about my granddaughters. And Veronica? Well, Veronica disappeared from our lives. I heard she moved to another city, that she was working in something that didn't require a law license. I felt no satisfaction hearing that, just a distant sadness for all the potential she had wasted due to greed and arrogance. 6 months after that day in court, I received an official letter. It was from the Judicial Systems Board. They were offering me a position to return as a consultant judge, a special position created just for me. I would only work 2 days a week. I would review complex cases. I would advise young judges. Michael was with me when I opened the letter. He read over my shoulder. Are you going to accept? I looked at the letter, then at him. What do you think? I think you should do whatever makes you happy, Mom. You've lived for others long enough. I accepted the position. And on the first day I returned to the courthouse, this time officially, and not just for a special case, I walked through those corridors with my head held high. I greeted old colleagues, I met new ones, and I sat in my office with my name on the door. Judge Elizabeth Morgan, Judicial Consultant. That afternoon when I got home, I found a bouquet of flowers on my doorstep. The card read, "Because it's never too late to bloom again. With love, Michael, Natalie, and Olivia." I sat in my living room, the same room where I had spent so many nights feeling lonely and broken, and I cried. But they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of release, of closure, of a new beginning. I thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation outside the courthouse, the years of silence and pain, the moment I decided enough was enough, the look on Veronica's face when she saw me sitting in the judge's chair. And I thought about who I am now. No longer the invisible mother who made herself small to be loved. No longer the woman who hid her achievements like shameful secrets. Now, I was just Elizabeth. Complete, whole, unapologetic. My phone rang. It was Natalie on a video call. "Grandma, can you help me with my homework? It's about the judicial system." "Of course, sweetie. Tell me what you need." As I explained the 3 branches of government to her, I smiled, because this is what I had always wanted. Not to be feared for my title, not to be respected for my power, just to be known, seen, and loved for who I really am. That night, before I went to sleep, I looked at myself in the mirror, a 71 years old. Gray hair, wrinkles that told a story, but also eyes that shone with a renewed life, a recovered purpose. And I said to myself quietly, as I had done so many times during the dark days, but this time the words were different. My name is Elizabeth Morgan. I was a judge for 30 years. I raised a son on my own. I survived abandonment. I survived betrayal. And I didn't just survive, I was reborn. My name is no longer just the name of a mother, the name of a mother-in-law, the name of an old woman who gets in the way. My name is mine again, and my story is just beginning.